And we're now getting some more inputs on the story that we're tracking. Now, U.S. has called Venezuela's takeover an operation. U.S. State Secretary says that this was not an invasion, but an operation. And Donald Trump says that U.S. is in charge in Venezuela. And Rubio now says that it was an operation and not invasion, as how the world leaders are claiming it to be. He also says that US won't govern but push oil blockades and will push for changes through oil blockade. So on one hand, Rubio is claiming that this was just an operation, not invasion, and we will just work on the oil blockades. On the other hand, Donald Trump is warning that no matter who becomes the leader in Venezuela, it will be the US that will be leading the charge, and the leader will be answerable to the United States, and the leader must do whatever United States feels is right for Venezuela. So that's the latest that's coming in. On one hand, Donald Trump has issued a warning to Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president of Venezuela, who is all set to become, has been appointed as the interim president of Venezuela. He has warned that she must do what Donald Trump thinks is right for Venezuela. On the other hand, State Secretary Marco Rubio is claiming that this was not an invasion, but just an operation. So Marco Rubio has called this an operation and not an invasion. He says that the US will not be governing Venezuela, and they will just be working on the oil blockades. They won't govern but push oil blockades, and they will also push for changes through oil blockade. But this is very different from what Donald Trump is saying, and in fact he has even warned the interim president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, on how to work moving forward. And he has also claimed that Venezuela must do what the US thinks is right, and that he has clearly sent out a message that an indirect takeover has been done by the United States, and Venezuela will now be governed by United States. So it seems like the US State Secretary Marco Rubio and the president are not on the same page, because Marco Rubio on one hand claims that the US will not be governing Venezuela and they will just push for oil blockades, whereas on the other hand, Donald Trump has clearly stated that no matter who becomes the leader in Venezuela, they must do what the US thinks is right. Otherwise, they will face action if they don't agree to whatever the US is saying. Now, Marco Rubio has said that this is not an invasion of Venezuela by the United States, but it is just an operation, whereas Trump says that US is now in charge of Venezuela. And Marco Rubio is saying that US won't govern, but only push oil blockades. India Today Global's Pranay is now joining us on the story with more details. Pranay, it seems like the US State Secretary Marco Rubio and the President Donald Trump are not on the same page. As on one hand, Donald Trump claims that US is now in charge of Venezuela and they will be taking the final call as to what needs to be done, whereas Marco Rubio states that US won't be governing Venezuela, they will just be pushing for oil blockades.
I don't think so, Anjali, that they are not on the same page. In fact, if you have heard U.S. President Donald Trump in the presser, he said that Marco Rubio had a long phone call with the Delcy Rodriguez, and that's why, running and governing Venezuela means you will be placing people to govern Venezuela. Rather, U.S. has chosen a path where they will be indirectly running the country, where their oil interest has already been spelled out. And if you see how Secretary Marco Rubio has said that he defended the U.S. action and he called it a special military operation. This is not an invasion. And he said that it wasn't necessary because this was not an invasion. We didn't occupy a country. Because when you occupy a country, when you run a country, you have to have boots on ground. And in this case, U.S. only, they only went inside Venezuela and they extracted the President Nicolas Maduro. But this is a law enforcement action as per Secretary Marco Rubio. And he said that U.S. won't be governing, but they will press changes through oil blockade and other things because they do not want to have boots on ground, because US has seen that when they go inside a country, when they have boots on ground, that it brings a lot of challenges, and that is the apprehension many US lawmakers have expressed, that are we going into a similar situation like Iraq or Afghanistan? So I think Secretary Marco Rubio has tried clarifying that situation, that US is not going to have boots on ground. US won't be placing people there. Rather, they will choose people of their own choice, and people with those who can work with US government. And President Donald Trump has already spelled out that Secretary Marco Rubio and Secretary Pete Hegseth and some of the government officials, they will be running the Venezuelan affairs through a committee, and they will be working with the existing people, those who are in charge of affairs in Venezuela.
All right, Pranay, thank you so much for all those details. So the US will now be governing Venezuela indirectly, no matter who becomes the leader. That's what it seems like from the statements that are coming in from the top leaders of the United States. After months of threats and pressure tactics, the United States has bombed Venezuela, toppled its leader Nicolas Maduro, and taken over the country. Maduro and his wife are now in US custody. They have been whisked to New York to face drug trafficking charges. Maduro has been taken to the headquarters of US Drug Enforcement Agency, where he is being questioned. He is now expected to appear in Manhattan Federal Court on Monday, that is today. The UN Security Council is also due to meet later today after Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that the US actions set a dangerous precedent. But the US has defended the strike, saying it was not an invasion but an arrest operation. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has insisted that congressional approval was not required since the law enforcement operation was carried out by FBI agents. Meanwhile, left parties held protests against America's strikes in Delhi and parts of southern India, chanting anti-Trump slogans. CPIM leaders have accused the Indian government of remaining shamefully silent and unable to criticize Donald Trump. But US takeover of Venezuela's oil sector could stage major gains for India. It can help unlock nearly $1 billion stuck as unpaid dues to Indian firms and revive oil production in Venezuelan fields operated by India. The new supply option would reduce dependence on oil from Russia and West Asia.
The worst criminal in the world is Donald Trump. What one president has to capture a elected president of a country, to arrest and take, because they have power, they have air power, they have military power. By force, they are capturing a leader from one country and taking into his own country. He should be tried. He should be tried for his, it is a war crime. He should be tried as a war criminal, and that should be the opinion of the democratic and secular people of the world.